Hello everyone. Today let's talk about tilings. So tilings are when you have a repeated pattern on a surface. One of the most common and well-known examples is like a tiling of like a kitchen floor. So here the repeated pattern, you've got repeated squares going over and over and they cover the entire floor. There's other examples of patterns, of tilings rather, in nature in particular. A good example is like a honeycomb. So these are little hexagons that repeat to cover the whole honeycomb. So it doesn't have to be just squares. And then you can find tilings in strange places like a fishing net, for example. If we zoom in, you can see like these little diamonds that repeat. So this is also, you can think of it as a tiling. So they're quite useful. And they're also used in art a lot. So this is an example of a tiling that you can find in La Alhambra, which is a Moorish palace in southern Spain. And it's not obvious what exactly the pattern is that is going on, because there's so many colors and shapes, but if you focus on this like sort of three-pointed shape, this repeats over and over to tile the plane. Just like that. So tilings can come in all sorts of different flavors. And so we're going to work on trying to introduce the students to tilings and to talk about them in sort of precise ways. So here's our activity that we're going to be doing. So the first step to this activity is like, how would you describe this pattern? Well, this pattern, this is known as the Cairo tiling, and you can take this as an opportunity to sort of tie this into some cultural aspects. It's called the Cairo tiling because you can find this tiling everywhere in Cairo. It's so ubiquitous that it's been associated with the city. And so you can talk about Egypt a bit. In terms of the actual tiling itself, the first thing you'll be really doing with it is asking, is there a generator? So right here. The word generator here is a little vague. It just means, is there a shape that you can find that you can repeat over and over so that you cover the whole pattern with no gaps and no overlaps? So one of the most obvious ones that you can find is like this sort of like upwards diamond shape. So if you repeat this over and over on the plane, eventually you can see, oh, okay, it starts to tile it. So, of course, it's not the only one. You can also find, like a horizontal one. And obviously, or not obviously, I suppose, but you can think about it a little bit, and these two aren't really compatible, but if you just stick with one of the shapes, you can tile the whole plane. Okay. But you can ask yourself, are there other shapes we can do? You can ask your students, can we come up with weirder shapes? So can we make them bigger? Can we make them smaller? Can we make them all funky? One of my favorite examples of a stranger shape that you can use to tile this pattern is what Alessandra calls the bone. And it kind of looks like this. Make sure I don't mess it up. Kind of looks like this shape. And you can stop and think, okay, double check. Does this actually tile the plane? And you can ask your students, does this shape that I drew actually tile it? Well, if you start playing around with it a little bit and you start trying to tile the plane, you'll realize that if you do it with just translations, with just shifting it around, it doesn't work because then we've got gaps that start to pop up here. So this one's special because you actually also need to use rotation. So you end up needing to tile it with the sort of pattern that looks like this. So you need to rotate it 90 degrees so it's sideways and use that shape as well. And then you can come in here and tile it like so. Yeah, just like that. And then this kind of almost herringbone pattern repeats like that. Cool. In this activity, don't be afraid to model productive struggle and really show your students it's okay to sort of explore and be wrong sometimes. So you can like draw down a shape on the plane and be like, okay, let's see, we're just trying to come up with some funky shapes that tile it. Does this shape tile it? And I've got this like purple shape here. and be like, okay, this one's really weird. Kind of looks like a fish hook, I guess. Does this tile the plan? You can play around with it and be like, okay, it's really strange, but I mean, here, let's just get another one going. And if we try to move it around, well, it can go here, I guess, or it can go here. But I don't think there's a way to get this to work. Yeah, this doesn't look like it's going to work. And then you can ask your students, like, do you think this is in a good shape? Like, and why not? And really, like, get everyone in on the conversation and work on getting that active collaboration and that reasoning together to really foster with these kinds of things. That's one of the ways that productive struggle can be really good for this kind of activity. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, don't forget to take the opportunity to tie this into culture. So kids love Egypt. They love talking about, like, what's their favorite Egyptian god, for example. And you can sort of tie it and talk about Egypt and such. But of course, this tiling doesn't just appear in Egypt. So here in this picture is an example of this Cairo tiling. This picture was taken in Japan, actually. So above all, don't forget to, model, playing around with this whole thing and having fun.